After being at a monastery some several decades, reading from its copious collection of metaphysical texts, a man finally requested to see the head of the order, and once in his room bowed and said, "Revered Master, for many years I have been here, ceaselessly immersed in the study of what has been said by those who've gone before. But tell me, please, amongst the millions of words, how can I distinguish between those which are valid and those which are vacuous?" And the elder smiled at him and said, "A splendid question, my boy. They are, one and all, worthless pig shit." And with that, he arose from his seat, walked over and put his arm around the lad, who stood there aghast, shocked, and bewildered, and added, as he gently guided him toward the door, "It's good you asked me about this, for now you have one less uncertainty to be concerned with. Don't hesitate to come again." And with that, out the door he pushed him. Glancing out the train window, said one of the passengers to another, I do so want to see Istanbul." And the other replied, "I also. But my father told me that if anyone ever tried to point the way directly there, that I should grab the finger they used to point and break it." The first writer thought on this for a bit, then said, "I am guessing that your father was as much speaking of matters internal and non-physical as I should have been in my initial reference to Istanbul, and that his comment had to do with the fact that ultimately all maps must be seen for the non-directional illusions they are and discarded." And the second traveler nodded agreeingly, while privately wrinkling his brow, his mental brow, searching to see and hoping on hope that such was how he had been perceiving it. On the Grand Transcendental Express, the last stop one hears being called out audibly is the one announcing the end of the line for words. And thank God are the words thought by many in the split second just before being freed from having to think in words. Hearing the sound of that nearby mental time clock, a man said, "If there is late and there is early, then I am a dead man. I may be walking and breathing, but I am still a dead man." One man invited himself on to a national talk show to tell himself something very important, but failed to show up for fear of what it might be. On one world, the creatures had two brains. One brain was still and steady, and the other active and excitable. Already aware of the answer, a man asked himself, "What is the most dangerous of impermanencies?" "Thought," he knowingly replied. And now this, there is no place to safely linger long. No, correction. There is no place to linger long, period. One man knew that he had taken the proper medicine. The problem was in digesting it. And speaking of liberation and efforts to that end, a hungry man never exhausts the available tactics and maneuvers. A mystical practice is only a practice as long as it is nourishing you. An alert man recognizes when the efficacy seems no longer there, and with no sentimentality lays aside one dish to partake of another. In the feast for the few, it is the stubborn who starve. Better to eat the bull than for you yourself to be bull-headed. Thoughts have made themselves wax wings with which to fly nowhere heat is produced. One man invited himself to appear with him in an upcoming bowl game, but declined when he learned that it would only be the two of them. Later, off camera, when no one else could hear, he snorted to himself, "Well, what'd you expect?" Which even then didn't seem to go all that far towards settling the matter between them. Or, as he even later noted as they waited for the bus, there's one in every crowd, even when the crowd's only two. Abstruse ideas, complex demands seem always to mark the mystical path. But always the few who make it through depart therefrom to make their own. Trampled underfoot and forgotten, the irrelevant, the unnecessary, that of no practical use. The successful journey travels on effort, not on road signs and theories. One guy says he's kind of got it presently narrowed down to like this: if it ain't in some way funny, it probably ain't so. And on an unrelated subject, another man says that he respects blank paper far too much to ever throw any away or use it. And still another chap says that the core of his complaint with word processors is the fact that you must constantly choose one of the lettered keys to strike rather than another one for it to, as commonly perceived and stated in the manual, quote, produce a usable product. And a final guy, at least in this series of guys, says, well, now we're getting somewhere. We must be, because all of this is in some way funny. And so must be true. And now some news from our royal watch. The king said, "It's cold in here." And a voice responded, "Why don't you turn on the heat?" And he replied, "Cause it'd get hot, and then I'd have to comment on that." And way in the back of the court, a quiet voice thought, "Hey, that is funny." And now an update from the world of surveying. The crew chief said, "If you don't know when to stop, you can't determine where to begin." And a trainee asked, "But if you don't already know where to begin, how can you possibly ever know when to stop?" "My point exactly," he replied. And now some news from our mystic watch. Thinking, to the more conscious, is good for but one thing: fun. As you stand in the Paris station, looking in the apparent direction of Istanbul, there are many tracks before you. But the one of your own, already extant mind, is the only one to commence travel. There was once a city in which everyone lived in the area where their light was produced. But a few people wandered beyond the zone and made several surprising discoveries. One was that once away from the area where the light was being produced, they became aware for the first time of a ceaseless background noise that appeared to be some byproduct of the light production. And another, most surprising of all, in fact near unbelievable to hear about, was their discovery that out there, away from their natural source of light, they could see better. A certain man wanted it so much and had struggled for it so long that one day stood and surveyed himself in a mirror and thought, "I believe the trick for you now is in weight loss. I'd say you need to drop, 3 or 4 pounds of preferences, distinctions, and discriminations." Regarding the labor of ill division, life is panoramic, thinking episodic. From a mystic's view, the problem with being in Bucharest is that when you're there is no problem that you're aware of at the time. The problem is felt later when you're not there and you look back on the circumstances of having been there. Consciousness, to some, is indeed a most intriguing domain. Thought is all of this world, for which no origin. Thought is all of this world, for which no origin can be found in dirt. Blunt version: for thought alone can no origin be found. There was once a warrior who fought 1,000,000 frantic battles in his mind, but when he'd look out in his backyard, everything was peaceful and calm. The realm of the unknowable doesn't exist until something is known. Doesn't that give you a hint? One man says that almost immediately after his enlightenment, the absolute best thought he had ever had in his life suddenly flashed through his awareness. I have been robbed and left homeless. A man asked a mystic, "Do you care if?" "I try not to," he replied. One man offered himself a rebate, then asked suspiciously for what, then replied, "I forget it." "Daddy, when are they going to read another news item about thinking?" "Shh, son, here comes the ball scores. If you care what you're stuck to, I told you, you'll stay stuck forever." Then the speaker stopped to note. When the speaker stopped to note that he was troubled by certain inconsistencies in particular areas of some historical reporting, a man in the audience thought, troubled by certain inconsistencies in particular areas? My God, sir, have you been alive on this planet all your life and yet not actually been here? See, Daddy, I just knew they'd do another story about thinking. The head of a mystical order, to mark an anniversary of the number of years a certain young monk had been there, said to him, "It is time for you to realize that the desire for fire can itself produce heat, and for you to see that you have sufficiently cooked yourself. You're done and just don't know it." The first lesson in a certain culinary school was how to remove preferences and distinctions before they remove you. Daddy, I believe here comes another story, finally, regarding thinking, that's hidden inside an apparent religious item. If God is universal, then the perceptions of local phenomenon is the creation of Satan. You know, son, I believe you're right. There is a stillness to life, and there is an activity to life. And in man's case, the activity is centered in his mind. To realize this is to be free to be still. A man asked a mystic, "Can you know the truth and yet forget the truth?" and received the reply, "You can know it and temporarily ignore it." The man mused on this momentarily, then asked, "Is that just as bad?" and received the reply, "Once you know the truth, everything's just as bad when you ignore it." A man once enlightened who lets the lights in his house stay off for too long runs the risk of falling back to dependence on the city's power supply. There was once a man who trusted only stillness and silence. In the struggle for liberation from the old and escape to the new, make thinking run along the ridge separating the real from the hyper-real. More regarding distinctions, discriminations, and etc. One man decided to read rather than watch TV, a discrimination. Then decided to read mystical writings rather than fiction, still discrimination. Then he decided not to read anything, which was still discrimination. Making no such decisions, now there's the ticket. The odds, looked at from an extraordinarily even keel. By mere chance can one be lucky. Also by fate. A man once thought, if I were going to make a public presentation of what I know within the expected religious framework, I would call it the church of, the more you identify yourself with things visible, the worse off you are. And if that went well, I would expand operations and establish an advanced version, which I would name the Supreme Church of, the more you identify yourself with things invisible, internal to you, whoa, then you've reached your absolute worst. Thinking that is concerned only with one's conduct leads a man nowhere new in his understanding. Question: what kind of behavior is most unbecoming a more conscious person? That's right, thinking like everyone else. Oh, and also feeling like them too. Another snapshot of things being just as they are, and obviously for the instant, just as they must be, regardless of men's comments to the contrary, which they accept as reasonable. A celebrated musician, notorious for his constant copious drug use, makes a statement pertinent thereto, and to which interested, otherwise rational parties nod their agreement. I don't really need the drugs to play like I do. And certainly he does. The drugs are an integral part of his playing, but due to life's present demands regarding how ordinary men perceive their unique mortal operations, such must be denied or denounced. Routine, unilluminating thinking continually attempts to study whatever matter may be at hand by mentally separating it from the environment. Enlightenment, when it comes, does not occur in just one specific area. It most certainly is not local. Everything gets lit up, and to such a degree that all boundaries to its objects and their surroundings merge and disappear. No, I don't really need the drugs of my brain chemistry to think like I do. They are my thinking. When a man saw a book entitled, How to Overcome Apathy, he thought, same as with everything else. You cannot overcome apathy without also overcoming non-apathy. So that they both become meaningless. There is no overcoming without irrelevance. Or, no problem is solved till it is rendered moot. Mooted beyond all realms of speech, thought, and problems. To be totally immersed in your thinking is like looking at a drawing of aromas rather than smelling for yourself. One man spelled smelling with 2 E's, smealing, rather than correctly with 2 L's, explaining that on his typewriter, the key for the letter E was closer than the one for L. And in conclusion, regarding these 2 items, I'd just like to say that, by God, you're right. There is nothing like thinking. And even just thinking about thinking. Today's question for today's traveler. Which is worse, never to have got it, or to have got it, and yet still keep not gotten it? In extremely secret areas of Istanbul are held unannounced classes of post-enlightenment instruction. Voices that enumerate the benefits that come to a man of virtue have always some personal gain in mind. Men are never encouraged to be other than they are for no reason. And life motioned for one man to take out his steno pad saying, "Take a lesson." A man asked a mystic, "What frightens you? Death? No. Being unloved? No. The forces of evil? No. What frightens me are the agents of impermanence." When they came around and asked if he'd like to get cable in his home, this one man said yes, and later disappointingly explained as he scratched his head that he thought they said get cable in his dome. Glancing upward, he said he was always in the market for any possible improvement of the situation. After reading the lengthy and complex growing directions which came with an exotic plant he had purchased, a man looked at it and thought, "Is taking care of you really that big a deal?" Which suddenly reminded him that most of men's perceptions of what's required to do almost everything are actually more complicated than are necessary. Thinking is always up to the task, as long as it is merely a thinking task. In the library, filed in the reality section, a man found a book with the title, "Anyone who reads these words will be sorry." After pondering on this for a few minutes, the man took the book and moved it over to the super reality section and left. Extreme travel info. Anyone who points you in a direction from you points you astray. He, struggling for that certain mental state, often feels like one starving just outside a kitchen. So close, I can smell it. One day, one man thought, maybe it kind of comes down to this. You can either mostly stay your old public ratty-ass self and then think about being more conscious when you're by yourself, or not. Why do the few so care what the mind may do? You do realize that it's only the mystically inclined and the mentally ill who are so interested and concerned with their mental life. One father's advice to a son: don't go looking for problems. And I'm not talking about external matters. Whilst watching the goings-on that every day going around him, a guy mused, "The world of man runs on little more than words." He continued. "The world of man is little more than words." He continued as he wandered and mused away. One man named his thinking boomerang, for reasons too obvious to mention. When a man heard someone declare, "We could learn a lot from death," he thought, "Name one thing." One man says he's invented a new optic device, a reversoscope, but says he doubts its market potential since men already mentally look through one. In regard to dealing with the disturbances he experienced pertinent to his place of residence, one man said he saw it as coming down to this: either stop the trains from running there through, or learn to ignore the noise they make. After studying with a mystic for a number of years, a man drifted away and later accidentally ran into him under circumstances less than laudable, approaching embarrassing, and said, "I guess you now look on your efforts to enlighten me as a waste of time." And to himself the teacher thought, "No, what I see as a waste of time are any efforts I've made to help awaken others which were not in fact intended to assist me." When feelings appear, understanding departs. Not feelings of the body, but the passions thought about in the mind. When such feelings arise, and they are not combated by conscious attention, all understanding departs A boy asked his father, "What mostly would an awakened man do?" "Mostly nothing, I suppose." "And I assume you're not speaking physically." Another one of those things that should be obvious. You've got to look where looking will do some good. In response to the oft expressed concern of being taken in by a charlatan, one man interested in things mystical had this to say: "I was never worried about such as that. For one thing, it would be most difficult for anyone that stupid to bamboozle me, what with me having the benefit of my own world-class stupidity to use for comparison. And secondly, to any degree that they might be able to mislead me, would be nothing in light of what my own thinking's already accomplished. All things considered, I cannot imagine anyone with an ability to dupe me that could surpass my own." Vocal music at the extreme edge. True artists never sing songs they did not write. Corollary: if the real artist has no original tune for the occasion, he is silent. Words written on a wall. My mind is like a knife and sees life as a pie. And there be the rub in my kitchen. After hearing a mystic speak, a man accosted him, noting, "I do believe that something you said I have read before somewhere." To which the mystic replied, "If you think, you steal." A man involved in his own struggle for new consciousness one day ran across this religiously couched proposal, quoting, He who looks for God's blessings tomorrow did not seek him today," and thought, "Yes, he who waits for the midnight train was not at the station this morning." Immediacy is the defeater of preferences. Proverb reformation. A still man dies but once. A thinking man 1,000 times. Attention shoppers. When you're awake, one of the cutest retro sights is you trying to get awake. Okay, shoppers, back to them carts. During the times he was not consciously conscious, one man would say to himself, "Boy, I hope there's something good on TV," which was his code for saying, "Well, back to thinking." And now appearing in the Vegas lounges of your mind, hi-ho, ho down, don ho, and ho hum, and like that. In the Vegas lounges of your mind now appearing. Look at it this way. If there is any special knowledge, it is only good for the present ailment, a tonic only good to treat an instant ill. One man had a saying, if you can bottle it up and take it with you, it's not worth taking. Only a man who knows can think, when I'm dumb, I'm dumb. But when I think I know, I'm double dumb. It's certainly easier on eyesight once you realize there's nothing to look for. Due to the distortions from the mind's preferential views, it can be said that the evil dead sleep just as soundly as the just. Once a distinction is established twixt fair and unfair, you shouldn't be surprised at the common appearance of both. One man had a pest in his house. which proved most annoying. And although he did not bring it in there, and could not control it, nor get rid of it, he was fascinated by it and couldn't seem to pull himself away from it. My apologies. Forgive me. There's a news item in there, but I'll let it go. All of you strung out Catholics with metaphysical bents can maybe straighten yourself back out within your own quick. You got to do it quick before I read another one. Version of what I had in mind. One man thought of the times he was not conscious as being kidnapped. If you have never grown, then guilt is meaningless to you. Only those who know something better can make use of guilt. In fact, only such can even experience real guilt. A speaker said to a group of some mystically interested, "It takes at least 3 lifetimes to achieve complete enlightenment." Or else one to realize the truth of what it is. Forget science fiction tales. The original time machine was the mind. The mind's primary preference is to be someplace else. A puzzled lad asked his dad, "What do you call it when it's not bad luck and it's not good luck either?" "Awake," he replied. To be clear-eyed is to see down the middle. To see down the middle to such a degree that all sides disappear from view. And the middle is all that remains. At some point, the most serious offense for the few is to not be as aware in everyday public circumstances of what you're aware of in special private ones, such as when sitting alone, profitably reflecting on the question of awareness. The extreme clarification regarding the matter of effort. Everything's futile until it works. A certain teacher said, "Some men's minds are too active for them to ever achieve enlightenment." And a student said, "But isn't everyone's mind too active?" And the mystic replied, "Yes, but some people's are also." You think the student got it? If we picture thinking as the build-up to calm consciousness in sexual terms, then all criticism is like negative foreplay. Well, I was just faking that, see, of course I got it because I wrote it. In his place of business, one man had a sign, "No credit given, none accepted." His place of business was his mind. It requires a long time in the struggle to realize that time is, to the struggle, at best, irrelevant, and at worst, an impediment. No, that's not so. All across the board, time is an irrelevant impediment. If there is a heaven and there is a hell, then there is the world of awakening and the world of thinking about it. One man opines that you're making some kind of progress when, instead of your mind frightening you, you begin to frighten it. There was once an enlightened oracle who, for every 1,000 questions asked, replied only twice. Let us take an individual lesson from this awakened one. Part of the secret is that things are much calmer than you think. It has long been noted that the truth is big and useless and wanted but by a few. The difference between the ordinary mind and the mystical one is that the mystical mind is always satisfied to be wherever it is at the time. It is that rare farmer with the extraordinary appetite who gets the most from his fields by removing all boundaries therefrom. As was noted, part of the secret is that things are much calmer than you think. And a man asked, "Do you mean that things are much calmer than I think they are, or that things are much calmer than my thinking is?" And in response, I say, I stand by my original statement. As a child, one man played with action figures. As adults, do still most. Papa, why is Buddha always laying and sitting? And perchance are his physical likenesses not to be taken physically? And as he rolled over, he mumbled to his bed partner, "Wake me when they have liposuction for the mind." Law. Croak. Now, news items universal file number 96143. As he sat on the throne one dreary day, glancing toward the nearest window, the king absent-mindedly whined in the general direction of his chief counsel. "I do wish this weather would improve." To which the advisor responded, "Why, my lord?" And instantly the king thought, under these conditions, wouldn't it be grand if I were part of some Zen story and that the counsel's reply to my comment sparked my awakening? But no, no such luck. Knowing me, I'll just nod and continue sitting here, morosely staring out the window. Momentarily, the courtier, realizing his grace's mood, interrupted his reverie and asked if he wouldn't like to have some dancing girls or maybe some popcorn. And the king, his attention suddenly shifted to a more expansive level, understood the intention of the offer, and was, for a fleeting instant, saddened by the realization that under all routine conditions, such distractions would prevail and succeed. Later, while taking a royal leak, he was joined at the urinals by his chief counsel, to whom he said, as he continued his regal staring into the stream, "You know, you just can't win." To which the subordinate gave the appropriate reply, "Ah, yes, but you're the king, and you knew that all along." Then they both nodded agreeingly, shook off, and quietly went their ways for the day. There was once a king who decided that it would be good if he could appear wittier and tell interesting stories. So he hired a man who seemed to be proficient at such to write material for him. And sure enough, his excellency seemed to become more popular, and so continued to return to the writer for more things to say, but eventually simplified the situation by eating the man doing the writing. This story has another life if you reverse the figures in the final line, but I'll leave you to do that for yourself if you're interested. 3 men on the mystical quest one day came upon a stream, and the first one said, "It is a sad river that runs in but one direction." And the second one said, "It is a sad river that runs in but both directions." And the third one said, "But sadder still is a river still running." And all 3 fell in and were freed. Sometime later, a certain king, upon hearing of this, remarked, "Say, that sure does sound like a lot like one of them Zim stories I was talking about." There was once a man who thought, "I want to experience the enlightenment, whatever it is, but since I don't know how to go about it, and inasmuch as I have even heard it said that there is no way to go about it, what possibilities are left? Only one that makes any sense, and that's don't go about whatever I'm already about." And the spirit, the nice and tanned spirit, I might add, of Zoroaster retired to the beach in Miami, smiled to himself, saying, "Now that's my kind of guy." Some optometry news. The mind assures man that there are several ways of looking at everything, but without making note that it is the inherent structure, that it is the inherent structure of its vision that is solely responsible for this condition. And now some general health news. In the floodplain near the stream wherein the 3 travelers fell, you can make yourself sick, but not yourself well. And now some news from the world of real estate. You're never home if you don't realize you're home. When one man died and went to the place of judgment, as his reward, he was given the choice of going either to a place wherein he would, for eternity, hear other people discuss the enlightenment, or be sent to an area where he would sit forever by himself thinking about it. And in a totally unprecedented action, the man suddenly went on a rampage screaming, "You call this a fucking reward? You people are as crazy here as the ones I just left." And our old friend, the king, hearing about this also, again complained, "See, there's another one of them Zen stories I got left out of." And Zoroaster moaned contentedly and rolled over, giving up his back to that warm South Florida sun. After having resided in many busy and complex areas during his life, one man finally thought, "I want to move where it's barren." Tonight's corset, or corset buster. If you don't understand, it's all different. And if you do, it's all the same. You can exhale now. The world of man's mind is unique in yet another manner, in that it is the only place in the universe wherein a, let us say, faulty washing machine can be fixed merely by thinking about fixing it. Obviously, we all understand that this is not literally so, but a few realize that operationally speaking, something quite similar does take place. While there is no available term for this phenomenon, if you can listen real quick, it could be thought of as amelioration through procrastination. There was once a walk-in clinic for waking up, at which the director held daily question and answer sessions with the students until such time that they were able to do so for themselves in their own minds, which was supposed to ultimately lead them to the abandonment of all question and answer activity. Recently, a gentleman walked in the clinic and asked whatever happened to the Jamaican restaurant that was previously in that location. Every time one man would hear romantic songs with titles like "Hold Me Close and Never Let Me Go," instead of another person, he'd think of his thinking and privately go, "Yeah." Ordinary consciousness is like a movie projected onto a still life painting. While walking the street one day, a man wondered if inanimate objects could ever be enlightened. So he picked up a stick and struck a lamppost. And when it did nothing, he concluded that it was indeed possible. And in fact made mental note of the location so that he might come back perhaps and consult with the post. Father noted his son to a non-routine progenitor, "I am still unable to love those who dislike me." "Well, at least," he responded, "you can cease to think of them, which cures the whole problem." "Yeah, just as always, huh, Dad?" When ordinary men hear it said that time and procrastination are the enemy, they will nod their agreement while thinking in terms of what needs to be done now being put off till next week or next month. Whereas a mystic sees the problem to forever be not doing each and every instant what he knows can only be done this very instant. Although that extraordinary consciousness always seems to come spontaneously, who is to say that an indefinitely held state of suspended thinking would not ultimately produce it, or even amount to the same thing? One man began to think of his thinking as being made possible through the use of Popeil's master grip. A mystic said to a son who was staring at a calendar, "No man can properly live the week who cannot ignore the days assigned thereto." This lad is he who grew up to later say, "Time does worse than kill us all. It causes us to postpone our death." A truth that, even in his grave, increased his father's awakening. There are two ways for the would-be liberated to reinforce their captivity. One is by thinking about themselves. The other is by thinking. A man wrote to a mystic asking, "Is it a sign of progress if you have begun to frighten yourself?" And received the reply, "That's dependent on which of your operations is causing the fright." I would name this correspondence, "We can always hope for the best." Some of the unseen economics of the struggle. A nice advantage to dealing in consciousness rather than thought is that you cannot conserve and lay up storehouses of surplus goods for future use that you must then worry about preserving and defending. One man was thrown out of an enlightenment school because he kept reading ahead of everyone else in the textbook. Still more of how things could actually be going on in life and men not recognize it. The study of rats in laboratories causes cancer in the rats. Another reason that trying to directly work on the mind seems superior to not so trying is that you're apparently doing something, even when you're not, which is most of the time, and even when you forget to try, which is constantly, and even when you do try and don't succeed at anything notable, which is the rule. But in spite of all that, it still looks preferable to the pursuit of the life and death cycle approach, which doesn't seemingly have a place to begin or a crack to get your finger in. There are two ways the would-be awakened can help assure their continued sleep. One is by thinking about themselves, and the other is by thinking. Decisions. One man decided to call his own private efforts by the name of do whatever it takes, but also realized that that was not all it would take. One man decided, to hell with it, which didn't work either, since he then couldn't get that out of his mind. The one decision a man can make in this regard that does work is the one that can't be mentioned. There are two ways that the would-be enlightened can keep themselves in the dark. One is by thinking about themselves, and the other is by thinking. You beginning to get the idea? El Cutto.